Are we good, Billy? All right, good morning. It is a pleasure to see so many people interested in learning more about collective impact. I'm Pam Clark-Reidenbach, Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence, more fondly known as NICNE. I'd also like to introduce to you Billy Callahan, NICNE's Associate Director and Tech Magician. She will be monitoring the chat during the session today. As some of you are aware, NICNE co-hosted Sylvia from the Tamarack Institute back in 2017 to introduce our community to collective impact. She led us through an exercise where we chose education as a key initiative to focus our attention, and returned in 2018 where she guided us in choosing a focus on early childhood, giving birth to the Ready to Learn initiative. Sylvia also trained 12 individuals in our community on how to facilitate collective impact. Several of us have gone on to address significant social issues using this cross-sector approach. At NICNE, we are using collective impact to guide our work with cross-sector community partners and people with lived experience around coordinated case management, the youth mental health system of care, building a culture of belonging, and environmental sustainability with our partner Sustain Rockford. You will also learn more in the next few weeks about NICNE's plan to roll out a social innovation and collaboration laboratory, where we can further assist organizations and individuals with your initiatives and organizational or community collaborations. Please stay tuned. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today. Sylvia Cheuy is the Consulting Director at the Tamarack Institute's Collective Impact Idea Area. Sylvia completed her graduate diploma in social innovation at the University of Waterloo, where she explored opportunities to create change within regional food systems. Prior to joining Tamarack, Sylvia was the founding executive director to Headwaters Communities in Action, a grassroots citizen initiative that fosters collaborative leadership and action in support of a long-term vision of well-being for Ontario's Headwaters region. This experience gave Sylvia practical knowledge and firsthand experience of what it takes to engage and mobilize positive community change. We are so pleased to have Sylvia back with us. Please give a warm welcome to our friend, Sylvia Cheuy.
Wow, what a beautiful way to start a Monday. Such warm welcome, and it is an absolute pleasure to be looking at the screen and seeing so many new faces and seeing with the wonderful support and nurturing of NICNE, this growing interest and experience in using what I think is one of the most powerful frameworks to generate lasting impact around some of our toughest and most complex community issues. So what we're going to cover off today, and I'll jump in and share my slides in just a second, is to really ensure that you're all kind of on the same page about understanding what we mean when we talk about collective impact. Hopefully give you a story or two so you can actually see what this theory looks like in real life in one community context, and then really want to highlight with you that for real impact, this framework works when you really appreciate and understand how it is setting the stage for us to think and work differently on some of the issues that many of us have spent a lot of our career focused on, and then give you all a chance to meet each other in small groups and sort of digest what you've learned theoretically in terms of the work you're working on in the community and really zero in on what might you see as some of the big opportunities, but also explore what some of the potential challenges would be in embracing an approach like this to advance change in the community. So without further ado, let me see how good my tech wizardry is and share my screen. So let me bring it up here. Bear with me, and I will put it onto my slide presenter mode. So hopefully you'll be able to see this in just about 10 seconds. Is it showing up? Yes, there we go. All right. So let's just dive right into things. We in Canada are, as a nation, deeply committed to a process of truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous citizens. And we begin most of our gatherings by inviting all of you to join us in grounding on the land in which you are this morning and recognizing that we are, all of us, meeting on Indigenous land. And that as settlers, we need to acknowledge our gratitude to the generations of Indigenous people who've been stewards of this land, and also recognize the significance and importance of acknowledging Indigenous peoples and their connection to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of our commitment to truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So if you happen to know the land, the Indigenous peoples on whose land you find yourself this morning and want to put that into the chat box, please go ahead and do that. For those of you who are learning about Tamarack for the first time, we are based in Canada and we are a national charity. We have two divisions at Tamarack. Our Vibrant Communities division is really home to now 4 national collective impact networks, where we play a critical role in sort of building the capacity of local collective impact projects on a range of issues, and also importantly, link those local efforts together, both to learn from each other, but also to coordinate strategic efforts on lasting systems change. And a lot of the practices that we use to build that capacity and support collective impact in its implementation, you'll see are part of what we've identified as 5 interconnected practices that build a solid container for lasting community change, of which you'll see collective impact is one. And I'm so excited to hear about NICNE's upcoming focus on community innovation and collaborative leadership, because those pieces, along with community engagement and evaluating impact, I think are the pieces that really allow creativity and innovation to flourish in how we tackle our community issues. So this is me. My contact info is here. I know that Pam and Billy are going to be sharing the slide deck out to you. So this is your cue. If you've got ongoing questions, you want to access some additional resources, that's how you find the site. And don't be shy about reaching out if you have other questions as well. So we've gone through already what I hope we will cover in our time together this morning. So let's dive right in. I am going to invite you and I think I have to shift out of my presenter mode here, to get you to tell us, where would you self-assess your knowledge and experience with collective impact? Are you just learning? Are you have a developing knowledge? You would assess your knowledge as being well developed, or you have quite a bit of experience. That could also be true. So I am going to see about launching this poll and invite you all to chime right in. I'm looking for the poll here, just one second. There we go. And invite you all to just weigh in. Where would you put yourself in terms of that continuum? Look at that, we're at 80% already, so I'm giving it a few more minutes. Okay, can we get to 90%, folks? We're at 85 right now. Ah, nudging up a little higher. I feel like I'm watching a roulette wheel. All right. Well, we are at 88%. We're going to give it 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to show you where people landed. All right, can you all see the results? No, okay, it says stop sharing. It may just be slow, but 52% of you have said you are just learning, which is fantastic. 38% of you would say you have a developing knowledge. 5% are well developed, and 5% would assess yourselves as experienced. And I think that's the beauty of these kinds of learning opportunities, because what they do, in my perspective, is they let you know there's lots of local expertise and lots of local experience. And that is what's really powerful. And to, as a community, to be able to really leverage that knowledge and experience is really important. because what we've learned is the framework of collective impact is powerful, but what is equally powerful in our experience is the uniqueness of your place and being able to trust your knowledge of who's showing up and really leverage that in the design and implementation of your work. So bear with me 1 second. I am once again going to pull this up and see. It's not letting me do what I need to do. It's being tricky here. Let me see if I can share my screen again. Oh, bear with me. It's doing crazy things. This is not very happy. So 1 sec. Oops, that's not working. Hang on. I apologize, folks, for all of these lovely glitches, which I am not always great at. Okay. So let's try this. All right, there we go. Now I can see you, which is helpful. All right, so now I can bring up my slide deck, I hope. Bear with me. Okay. So you are seeing that I am a bit of a neophyte when it comes to the tech stuff, not my big forte, but we're here now, so all is good. Can you all see the screen yet or no? No. All right. So give me 10 seconds. I'm going to try it again. There we go. I see it. All is good. Life is great. Okay. So let me bring this over and make it be a full slide deck, and then we'll be good. How's that? Yay. All right. Let me leap through to get to where we were. All right. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about the fundamentals of collective impact so that you kind of all are on the same page. Before we dive in, I should say it's my experience that there's lots of people who are familiar with the terms collective impact and use them pretty fluidly. And we at Tamarack are a bit, we're purists, I would say, in our understanding of this framework. And we really riff off both our experience advancing collective impact in communities, but also the framework that was initially introduced by Kenya and Kramer back in 2011. Can you believe it's been 10 years? And some of the new evolutions to that framework rooted in 10 years of experience implementing it. So initially, the definition was really about a disciplined form of multi-sector collaboration that had been shown to have tremendous impact on generating lasting community change. And part of the reason for that was a very intentional focus on not just programmatic solutions, but also intentionally looking at systems and policy barriers and how those also might be able to be addressed. And we'll talk more about what we mean by that as we go through this presentation. What's interesting is just this year, to mark the 10-year anniversary, John Kenya, one of the original authors, along with other practitioners from the Collective Impact Forum, have intentionally upgraded the definition of collective impact. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. As a network of community members, organizations, and institutions that advance equity by learning together, aligning and integrating their actions to achieve population and or systems level change. And what's really powerful for me about that is two things. If you look at both definitions, collective impact is a form of collaboration, but what makes it unique is a real intentionality about bringing unusual partners from different sectors together to focus, learn from each other, and explore their shared issue and come up with a shared action plan for how they can contribute to positive change around it. And if you'll see from the 2022 definition, the upgrade, there is now much more an explicit recognition of that it's not just organizations and institutions, but it's also community leaders that are at that table. And I think that's a really important and powerful addition. And furthermore, that all of the work that we are doing is being dictated by a commitment to advancing equity through whatever strategies or pathways you choose, be it early childhood success, be it career, education to career transitioning and alignment. It's all about equity. So we at Tamarack love this thing called the collaboration spectrum. And why we like it and why it's important to understand it in the context of collective impact is that when I say collaboration and you say collaboration, we're using the same words, but we may not necessarily be meaning the same things. And in fact, if you look at this continuum, there are, 7 different elements or degrees of collaboration that might be possible. So important when you're bringing diverse partners together to have them both assess where do we think, at what degree do we see our current level of collaboration, and also to make meaningful change on this issue that we both care about. What level of collaboration do we think might be necessary? Interesting because it helps us see if we're starting from the same place. It helps us to also see that there is a whole range of options. Not every option is the right option for either readiness or what's needed. Sometimes it is just about communication and information exchange. The area that we've depicted here with the red box is the space where collective impact lives. And what's important to recognize about those 3 on the right end of this continuum are that it is not just a one-off commitment to cooperate or work together on a specific project, but the collective impact implies a much more intentional, longer-term commitment between different partners to work together. And that you are working together on a shared set of goals, you have shared decision-making, some pooled resources. It may or may not ultimately land in integration, but certainly that can be a possibility that's brought forward as well. And lastly, just want to point out that as you move along the continuum, there's some assumptions really about the level of trust required for this to thrive. And signals to me that when we're building a collective impact initiative, paying attention to the process and how we get to learn from one another and build trust with one another is as important a piece of the work as getting clear on the what we are going to do together. Okay. We've often used this, I should say, as a tool as well, where we get people to say, okay, put a blue dot where you think our current level of collaboration exists, and put a green dot where you think we need to have a level of collaboration to achieve what it is we say we want, and then have a rich conversation about what would it take to move us there. In addition to the core 5 conditions that were part of the original collective impact framework, there were also listed a number of preconditions, which don't necessarily get a lot of play, certainly as much as the 5 conditions, but we at Tamarack love to think about these conditions almost like a bit of a readiness assessment, right? So before you even launch a collective impact initiative, have you built a solid enough leadership foundation where you have influential champions who are credible messengers within their sphere of influence, their sector, their perspective, and that each one of these feels passionate about this opportunity and the issue that is the focus, and are willing to actually roll up their sleeves and invest time and energy building commitment, building understanding, really helping to advance the process. urgency of issue really is asking all of us to do a critical assessment. Just because we have decided as folks who are living and breathing a particular issue every day, that this is an issue that warrants real focus and collective action, doesn't mean that the average person in the community would necessarily agree. And so one of the elements that becomes really important is to do a candid assessment. What are people saying? How do people think about our issue? Because sometimes pulling out data, telling stories that share the impact and also what's possible might be a key foundation building piece that needs to happen before you even formally launch a collective impact initiative. So that's another dimension. Adequate resources is a third. One of the beautiful things now is that collective impact is so recognized as a credible option and approach that funders are a lot less reluctant to invest. And in fact, some are very explicit about saying, we only want grants that include a collaborative partnership of unusual partners working together. But the thing I really want to emphasize is, regardless of the resources that you are successful about securing from outside the community to really advance this work, what you really want to be looking at as well is what investments are the partners at the table willing to make to really be part of this initiative. And by resource, I don't just mean money, though it could be. It can be secondment of a staff person a day or two a week. It can be expertise. It can be meeting space. It can be access to data and information. It can be access to strategic partners to learn together, facilitation supports, all of these things. When a partner brings those to the table in terms of how we build and shape what this it is that we're going to work on together, that's how they model their commitment and ownership to this shared work. So you want to welcome all that comes. And not every partner is going to be able to provide the same level of resource necessarily, or the same types of resource, but all are needed to really advance this work over time. And lastly, we like to look at history of collaboration. Have there been lots of successful collaborations in the community? If so, that really primes the community to really see and accept the importance and value and trust that these kinds of approaches can have impact. When I launched the Headwaters Communities in Action initiative, which was collective impact before we had the benefit of the framework, we happen to be one of 2 municipalities in our entire province that, when the province declared that there would be forced mergers between municipalities, our little rural community was one of 2 outliers that stood up and said, no way, no how. No way, we're not doing this. Sorry. And so, we're trying to launch a collaboration in a community that is very suspicious of and anti-collaboration. And so one of the strategic realities we knew from these precondition assessments is part of our work that's really important is to demonstrate that collaboration here can work. And not only can it work, but it can make things possible that working alone can't achieve. And that is a large part of what we paid attention to in those early days. So then let's move forward. Let's see why my little thing doesn't want to move. Okay, so in addition to the preconditions that we just went through, the absolute core of collective impact are these 5 conditions. Okay, so let's just go through a quick recap to emphasize some of the ways in which they're different, quite different from a traditional strategic plan that you might be familiar with for an organization. So the common agenda is absolutely got a shared vision element to it. So an aspiration that you as community partners are seeking to achieve. And if we honor the more updated definition of collective impact, it really is about how are we contributing through this work to a more equitable community for all, right? But shared vision is critical, but it's not all that the collective impact common agenda includes. Beyond that shared vision It's also a clear statement from the collaboration partners that there is no way this vision is going to be achieved unless we commit to a long-term partnership of working together on making it happen. And beyond the vision, it's also a clear statement from those shared leaders about what the key priority areas of focus are that as a collaborative, you're committed to championing and prioritizing to help advance progress from where the community is today toward that aspiration. Okay. Shared measurement is one of the dimensions of collective impact that I think really distinguishes it from other forms of collaboration. Because what it does is it says two things. One, when we are shaping our common agenda and building our shared priorities to achieve it, we are rooting ourselves in, to the best of our ability, some data points, right? The challenge always in setting a common agenda is that it could be so broad and there are so many diverse pathways or strategies you could choose to achieve it that it can quickly become overwhelming. And so data is very, very useful at the beginning to help make a case of where we might start or, some critical areas for attention. My colleague Liz Weaver, when she was launching the Hamilton Roundtable on poverty reduction, they initially, community leaders were hosting dialogues with all kinds of folks across the community wanting to talk about how poverty was showing up in the community. And nobody came. Why? Who wants to give up an evening to talk about something as depressing as poverty? And that many of us feel we can't really influence anyway. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for those champions, but they didn't get deterred. They went back to the drawing board. They took a look at their local data and they discovered that 75% of the folks currently living in poverty in their community were children. So that in and of itself led them strategically to reposition what they were trying to do as making their community the best place to raise a child, knowing darn well that if they focused on children, if 75% of the folks in poverty are children, you are going to make a positive difference. But that had a different kind of listening and a different kind of partnership that started to be attracted to this work. So setting your common agenda by rooting it in strategy is one key way in which the shared measurement component is important. But the second area where it becomes really important is that commitment and rigor that the partners are demonstrating. Not only are we committing to this common agenda, but we actually have identified key data points that we're committed to tracking over time that allow us to check in with ourselves about how we're doing, but also share with the community our progress and what we're learning. Mutually reinforcing activities is the third. This one's really interesting to me. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen with the implementation of this framework is we by default and habit start thinking about our collective impact strategy as an organizational strategy. It isn't. And one of the key areas you start to differentiate that is recognizing that before we do any kind of building of a plan, part of the power of collective impact is we bring these different providers, all of whom have been busy contributing in some way to this issue anyway, into the same room. And we create a space where no longer have they got their head down focusing only on their organization's mission, vision, and 5-year strategy and their deliverables to the funder, but it's that invitation for each of us to put our heads up and say, oh, look at that organization that, that has been part of this community as long as our organization. We didn't know you were doing programs like this, and we were doing programs like that. And you stop serving kids at 11, and we pick up kids at 18. Who's serving the 12 to 17-year-olds? Oops, nobody, right? We often get so caught up in doing our own work, we don't see our collective resource as a community. So this isn't necessarily about creating new programs and services. It's slowing ourselves down long enough to see what we have collectively and what else can we learn from each other and quickly replicate if it's a really effective practice, but also where are the gaps we want to work on together that nobody's working on, but could actually make a real difference in terms of the lives of the people we're supporting. Continuous communication is the fourth, and it actually has a number of dimensions to it that I think are important. One is when you bring different sectors together to work on a same issue, I guarantee you every sector is going to have their own jargon, their own expressions and terms to define certain client groups. And part of what we have to be aware of is we have to slow ourselves right down and give ourselves permission, because we're on a learning journey together, to say, okay, Pamela, you talk about blah, 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 blah people. Are these the same as what Alan talks about as these people? Or are they different? And in what ways are they different, right? I think slowing us down is a really hard thing, because that's not what we normally do. We are so good at taking action. We roll up our sleeves, we feel the urgency, we dive in, and we haven't actually learned from each other. I learned this one painfully when I was organizing our first ever regional food summit for the Headwaters group. We had 140 people coming to a gathering, right? We had chefs, restaurateurs, people from the food bank, food policy people, farmers, food producers. We were like thrilled. And I was trying to recruit someone that I volunteered with from somewhere else in the community, because I knew he was the VP of strategy for one of the biggest national food producers in Canada. And I thought, man, if I get Tom to this event, that's going to be a real coup for our local food effort. All along, I'm very clear. When I say local food, it's anywhere within 100 kilometers of our community. And I finally got hold of Tom and he says, Sylvia, I think what you guys are doing locally is fantastic. And interestingly, I've just come from a strategic refresh at Maple Leaf Foods. And we too have embraced local food as one of our top 5 strategies for the next 5 years. I'm going, yes, this is perfect. And then he keeps talking. And I realize his definition of local food is anywhere in Canada, right? I've been a facilitator for a really long time. How could I have overlooked something so basic, right? He speaks English as a first language. I speak English as a first language. We're saying the same words and we are meaning totally different things. So it's that's one dimension, right? The second dimension is that if you're the delegate from your organization sitting at the collective impact table, you're learning a ton. You're building really cool relationships. You're getting cool insights about how other sectors take a look at the same issue, but see it very differently. You're seeing great opportunities for synergy. How do you bring that back and make sure you're bringing the rest of your colleagues from your own organization along with you? It isn't just you, right? It's your organization. And collectively at the table, how are we supporting one another in bringing that knowledge back to our different organizations so the whole community is coming along with us? And lastly, I would say, why are we doing this work? We're doing this work in service of our community and the folks that we are championing. So how do we make sure we're bringing their voice forward? And how do we make sure we're communicating in ways that they can see those benefits and insights and opportunities that we are advancing? And lastly, the final of the 5 is backbone support. If you go back to the very first articles written by Kenya and Kramer about collective impact, you'll see that they refer to this as the backbone organization. We have come to realize that is really an unfortunate way to articulate this role, okay? And one of the reasons for that is we should never, or rarely, ever imagine our collective impact initiative as though it was an organization. The moment we do that, a couple of things happen that aren't helpful. One is we start unintentionally creating the collective impact initiative, which is meant to benefit all of the partners, as a competitor for many of the organizations that are trying to work together. And that works against you, right? A different way to think about, and in fact, the best definition I think I ever heard of collective impact was collective impact is the co-created innovation space that partners in the community have established. It is the way we come together, get ourselves out of the 80-90% of the time we spend on the day-to-day fulfilling our strategic plan, and say, you know what, we've got great people, they're working really hard. And if we're brutally honest, we're not having enough of an impact, or the demand for our services continues to outstrip what we can do as organizations. So this is the space that we have protected, where we are going to challenge each other to say, what more? What else can we do? We're not going to replace the existing programs and services. And we can't say to the people who rely on these quality services, sorry, we're going to stop everything for 3 years while we figure out what a better way to do this is. We've got to do both at the same time. And so the collective impact table should be way more agile, way more nimble, should not have lots of administrivia, should be that place of experimentation where we can try new things and diffuse the risk of not having these things work exactly as planned, but really be fuel for our learning. So, and it also recognizes that as it's not an organization, it still needs some infrastructure to enable us to work together effectively and efficiently. My colleagues Liz Weaver and Mark Cabage wrote this fabulous paper in 2016. So, about 5 years into people widely adopting this framework and applying it in a multitude of different ways. And what I really loved is they rooted in their own experience of seeing many of these initiatives take shape and challenged the field of collective impact practitioners to up their game. And this framework kind of accelerates or illustrates what they meant by upping the game. So they start at the far left to say, pre-collective impact, whenever there was a tough community issue, organizations individually for themselves took on a paradigm of what it is we need to do to respond to this emerging need, right? The challenge with that, when we're not working collectively, is we unintentionally are perhaps even working at cross purposes with each other, or certainly not working in alignment because we set different eligibility criteria, we offer different initiatives that then the person needing the service has to somehow string all together, right? And put the onus on the person or the family to coordinate what they need. The value and impact of collective impact is that it creates this opportunity for a shared management paradigm where the different stakeholders that all have some expertise and contribution to make to address an issue to actually coordinate and offer a coherent strategy and set of approaches, and also intentionally zero in on those places where all of us know more work is needed and none of us have the time. Right? We're protecting a small group of us to do some advanced thinking around it. What Liz and Mark's proposal is, yes, this is fantastic and needed, and we need to go further. We need to evolve collective impact through a lens where we're thinking about it as building a movement. What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is, even if you were to convene 40 of the most powerful leaders in Rockford to champion a collective impact initiative, those 40 people alone can't do it. They can't, even they're with a deep commitment and deep and shared learning, they're not going to be enough to make the kind of lasting change that we're calling for. So instead, those leaders from different sectors really need to be thinking of themselves almost like the orchestra conductor, right? How do we do this work, but do it in a way that engages people with lived and living experience to be part of the solution? How do we do it in a way that has our business sector look and see, wow, there's a stake in this for us too. Never thought about it this way, but there could be some real value add for us in being part of this work. So we want this common agenda that we embrace as the leaders of this initiative to be deeply rooted in the voice of community, deeply rooted in their commitment to making the community a better place as well. Shared measurement, yes, but why? Really from a discipline around saying we're going to be experimenting and trying new things. How do we know what's going to work and what isn't? And even if something doesn't work as planned, what does that teach us about our understanding of this issue? How have we now enriched what we know and what will work and what won't? Mutually reinforcing activities, absolutely, but not driven by what's easiest and the lowest hanging fruit from an organizational perspective and a partner's collaboration perspective, but driven by what's going to make the biggest difference for the folks impacted by this issue, right? Don't play cautious, right? We got to do these big shifts because nobody else is going to try and take them on. And we're going to talk about this more, but also with an intentional focus, not just on programmatic solutions, but really taking a hard look at some of those systemic barriers that, despite the best programs, keep people limited in their success. And what's our role and what strategy are we going to build together to move that forward? Authentic community engagement, absolutely. So it isn't just communicating, it's communicating in such a way that everyone in the community feels like they have a role, a stake, and a contribution to make in advancing this change. And the container for community change is that these leaders of a collective impact initiative are building their initiative in such a way that it continues to attract and welcome the contribution of all kinds of partners, right, in fueling this effort forward, whether they formally align as part of this effort or not. So all that is the theory. Isn't that great? Far better in some ways, I think, to kind of root it in a story. Okay, so let's take one example so you can see how the theory gets put into action in a really powerful way. The example I'm going to use is from Erie, Pennsylvania. It's been well established for a while, and this is a story from its early beginnings, which happened around 2012-ish, 2011, 2012, shortly after the economic downturn, right, that impacted everyone. The then mayor of Erie wakes up to the startling news that his community has the highest poverty rates anywhere in the state of Pennsylvania, and he's horrified. Is this how he wants his legacy to be seen? No way. So he reaches out to his county counterpart, and the two of them put their heads together and they go, what are we going to do? Well, they do a couple of things. They start a number of community conversations with all kinds of diverse players, the business leaders, the philanthropists, the folks in the community who are experiencing homelessness and poverty, the folks in the church networks who are playing this quiet role behind the scenes, really helping hold people in crisis to some form of stability. And they look abroad. They look outside the bounds of Erie and they say, who's doing a really great job of addressing poverty at the community level? And what is it we need to learn from their experiences? And so they go out and have conversations there as well. From the local conversations and how they've been informed by others, they ultimately decide that what they're going to do is that they are going to champion this thing called Erie Together. And they've synthesized the themes that they've heard from everybody. Excuse me one sec. They synthesize the themes from everybody. And they come out with 3 priority areas that this collaborative is going to focus on. Okay. Learning, so that more children in the community are primed to become successful in their adulthood. More residents of the community are employed at rates that can sustain their families. And ultimately, the Thrive pillar was recognizing that there are some people in acute crisis right now, and we need to move them in quickly to some supports to stabilize them before we can pull them into some of these other dimensions. Here's what I love. When they launch this thing, they talk about Erie Together not by what it is, but by what it isn't. Not a social service agency, not a social service program, but a county-wide civic movement. That's beautiful, because what it does is it creates that, a movement building kind of image, right? Everybody in this community. It isn't like we get to hand the hot potato to Cheryl and Regina and say, okay, guys, we gave you all the input. Go on, off you go. You make it happen. No, they're putting people in the whole community on notice. We want to make this change happen. You want to see this? You got to roll up your sleeves and you got to do your bit. Absolutely. Then they focus in on what's the benefit. It's focused on preventing and reducing poverty and elevating prosperity. And they pull in those 3 themes of learn, work, and thrive. So how do they then start structuring this thing? They have those same multi-sector kind of perspectives around each of these action team tables. including folks with lived and living experience, and they pick 4 action teams that are countywide. And each one of those action teams is tied directly to one of those strategic areas of focus that the collective impact is named for itself. And under the learn pillar, they actually picked 2 instead of 1. One was really focused on early childhood readiness and success, very much like Rockford. Okay. And then the second was about making sure that there was tight alignment between the learning opportunities within the community and the jobs, the sustainable jobs that were available. Okay. So let's assume each one of us have been invited to join the early childhood learning readiness and success action team. Okay. So we have a number of meetings between and amongst ourselves because we're from different sectors, and we all very quickly agree. How would we know? The big question was, how would we know that a young child was on a good path to longer term success? Because that's our ultimate mission. And we all agree that these things are really good milestones or markers that are, defined in literature and proven that signal a kid is on a good path. There might be another one around born at a healthy birth weight, but kids are ready to learn by the time they get to kindergarten. They're reading at grade level by 3rd grade. They've had some support to really think about career exploration by 8th grade. They finish high school. Like, those are real clear markers. None of us disagree about that. But now we have to come up with our action plan for this pillar. And this is where our debate starts. Okay. Because we're all learning from each other too. So the gal from public health says, okay, if we know that graduating from high school is one of those most important milestones, I can tell you that we in Erie have the highest teen pregnancy rate anywhere in the state. And the evidence is absolutely clear. Teens that get pregnant in high school rarely graduate. So I think if we have to focus our efforts, there's a population that we need to be developing new strategies for. Okay. But then there's someone who's working in the youth juvenile justice system, says, you know what, folks, got to tell you, a young person who gets involved in the criminal justice system, 6 times less likely to finish high school. And again, if we're saying high school completion is a big marker, we need to really focus our energy and attention there. But then someone from the school board says, but wait, one of our mandates is making sure we're really preparing the young people of this community for the kind of careers that can sustain them into the future. And the science and the literature is really clear: science, technology, engineering, math. That's the curriculum that these kids need to excel at. And that's where we need to focus our energy. And then we've got another whole cohort saying it's got to be 3rd grade reading. Because, that's when they haven't lost their interest in learning. They haven't sort of given up, and we got to get in there early. What's the problem here? Can you see it? Any single one of these pathways would be absolutely the right pathway. It's not a right or wrong. It's a both and. And yet, if we're being really strategic as a work team, we know we've got to really zero in on 1 or 2 to start. So how do we pick, right? Because there's good case to be made for any one of these things. Ultimately, their group landed on 3rd grade reading. How they got there was quite by accident. Because at the 3rd roundtable of going around about what should we pick, someone came in incensed. They had just come from a national conference where they learned that the corporate prison sector uses 3rd grade reading as the most reliable predictor for how many prison spaces we needed to have ready 10 years into the future. People were incensed. Like, it actually cut down the debate back and forth, and people were furious. And they thought, well, jeepers creepers, if it's good enough for the corporate prison sector, it's good enough for us. And there it was. So the learning for you all is, it is about fact, but it's also about paying attention to where the passion is in the community, right? Because you are going to have a hard job moving this agenda forward. Harder still if people aren't sure of that this is the path. But if people are incensed, there's passion there, go with that. Know that you can handle the rest of these issues and opportunities forward, and have no apology in the community for why you're starting here, even though you recognize there's a number of places you could start. Because if you diffuse yourself too narrow, you're not going to get enough momentum and result in any one area to kind of keep fueling that movement. So the power of zeroing in, holding this big mandate, but zeroing in strategically on a couple of areas, is that they could really then get really practical and real. It isn't theoretical anymore, right? What do we know? How many kids in this community are not reading at grade level by grade 3? And this is what they learned, right? Below basic, 33%. At basic, 33%. Above grade level, 34%. That's their baseline. That shows you the power of that shared measurement, right? Then they dove deep and they didn't rely solely on one silver bullet strategy with the school boards to get this win. They also went out to the church networks and said, how many of your folks would be willing to volunteer at the library 3 days a week for drop-in storytelling with third graders and below? How many of you would be willing to, right, do this, do that? They brought in brand new curriculum. They brought all the teachers from the different school boards together to learn, are we all measuring the same stuff? What's the curriculum? What are the special programs? And what's important about how these programs are implemented that we already know make a big difference? So really multifaceted set of strategies with different partners doing their piece. And then they went back 3 years later and they did another assessment of the third graders. Look at that. 75% of their third graders are now reading at grade level, right? Why this is really, and this also illustrates the power of data, right? There is, and can I tell you the success and the celebration that happened in that community when these results are published? Because it affirms to the community that when we work together and when we are focused, we can make a big difference. Right? So that I think is a beautiful example of what it is and why it's different. Okay. So collective impact, not always the right approach for anything and everything, right? That's important to recognize. And these 5 questions, in our experience, if you as a group can powerfully answer at least yes to 3 of these, you're in good shape to move forward. Okay. But you've got to have the leaders of your boards and organizations know this isn't a quick fix. This isn't a one-time grant-driven initiative. This is a long-term commitment that we're making to these partners to have this move forward. All right. And just grounding again, it's not about a single organization in charge of this whole thing or holding the whole, all the money and making all the decisions. They may be a fiscal host, right, playing that administrative role, but the dollars and the strategy are owned by everyone. It's not about this new organization with its own policies and practices and. We want to be more nimble than that. We want to use the policies, practices of our existing partner organizations and allow ourselves to run. And we want to make sure that we're including different perspectives who wouldn't normally see themselves as part of this. The business community, right? The people with lived living experience and their kids who can help inform and shape what this is. All right, so quickly, just want to say, it is an approach that works. And I remember John Kania, one of the original authors, saying something really profound. He said, collective impact as an approach is not counterintuitive. When people read it, they see it, they go, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense, right? It is countercultural. And by that, I mean, we're so used to diving into organizations and seeing organizations as the solution and the driver of the solution. And that's not what this is. So it's challenging a lot of our own paradigms around how things happen, and in 3 really powerful ways. 1, really understanding that the need for multiple perspectives is driven by the fact that the issue we're trying to wrestle down is complex. There are many right pathways for how we could address it. That it requires a focus not just programmatically on creating solutions, but also looking at those system barriers. And it really understands the importance of having lived and living experience and individual as well as collective leadership. So just going to run through this very, very quickly. Not all problems are the same. Okay, so that's why collective impact you don't need for everything. If the problem is one that we already know, and we know how to fix it, i.e. we wash our hands, and that reduces the spread of disease. And it doesn't matter if you're in Caledon, Ontario, or Rockford, Illinois, if you do it, it's going to work. That's the realm where it's standard operating procedure. And our job is just to make sure people do it and know it and do it. Complicated means that there are many different pieces. So we need to pause and maybe get some technical expertise to understand what the solution is going to be. But again, once we figure it out, we implement it and it hums along beautifully. Putting on a play, beautiful example of that. Every play we do has a script, director, sets and props, costumes, great actors, great tech and lighting. Every play we set out to do, we got to figure out what each one of those elements looks like and click them together. But once we do, the play is going to keep humming along. Complex problems, which are the realm where collective impact is best suited, are emergent. So we can't tell always the relationship between cause and effect. We have to experiment. There's many different pathways. And so what we need to do is act, learn from that action, and keep on acting, right? That's where and why bringing multiple sectors together around the same table and spending time creating a shared understanding of the it is such a foundational part of how this work works. And the value of it, if I go back one, is that it challenges us. We cannot see what we cannot see from our own perspective. So when you bring those different sectors around the table and they're asking different questions, we now start to see the problem much more richly and with much more nuance. Therefore, we see new options for what we can do together. It is about harnessing that collective wisdom and making time to build it. So this is a scallop. Never saw one other than on my plate. This is what they look like in real life. Each one of those blue dots is an eye. Every eye we bring to the table, every different perspective, every lived experience person, they help us round out our full understanding of what is so that we can create better solutions together. So let's talk about systems and systems change and how is it different? I keep remembering this comment that someone made, you know, we keep investing in programs and getting so annoyed that the system doesn't change. Well, of course not. That's not what they were meant to do. If we recognize that there are systemic barriers that we need to address, equity being a beautiful example of that, then we have an obligation at our collective impact table to not just put in programmatic solutions, but to also be strategically thinking about what are the strategies that we are going to champion to address some of those systemic issues. What do we mean by that? Karen Pittman from the Forum for Youth Investment nails it. A program intervention will help an individual or a family beat the odds, but a systemic intervention actually changes the odds for everyone. And Trim Drayman from Social Innovation Generation also has a different take, but equally interesting, right? It's about looking at what are the conditions that are holding that problem in place and what's our strategy to unlock that. Right? It isn't just the programmatic solution or band-aid of the moment. And the folks at the Collective Impact Forum have done a lot of work thinking about what that looks like. At the beginning, you're seeing changes in policies, which could be organizational or municipal, state, federal. Could be changes in practice that get embraced and standardized. Could be flows in resources that are shifting and changing. At the mid-level, it's also about creating opportunities for new relationships and connections and different power dynamics between different players that have a stake in the same issue. And ultimately, the nirvana that we're all searching for, which takes a lot longer to get to, is changing our attitudes, our behaviors, the way we think about the issue. Those are the mental models. That's the path to lasting change. And that's the thing that takes us longest to get to. So this just says a little bit more about some of the ways in which we know we get to systems change. And lastly, it's about recognizing different kinds of wisdom are needed at this table to make this kind of change happen. We need those subject matter content experts, but we also equally need the participation and leadership of the folks we call context experts. So those are the people with lived experience of an issue in Rockford. So they know who the big players are in Rockford. They know who to bring in. They know what it looks like, right, to experience this issue in the community, because your solution has to reflect the uniqueness of your community. And lastly, it's about our organizations shifting gears. In a collective impact initiative, we are not the doer and the deliverer alone. We are the convener. We are the catalyst. We host the conversations. We bring forward the data. And we help drive this complementary approach to the stuff that our organization does day to day. And what this requires is, at that table, our organizational partners in collective impact are looking outward beyond their own organization and rooting in the needs of the community. And here's the other shift. For residents, it means they need to also embrace their own power and potential as leaders and co-creators of the solution, right? Not just a recipient of service or an information source in the odd focus group that you're invited to give input into, but that you're actually a participant and ultimately a leader at the collective impact table. And you're mobilizing your audience of influence to also be part of this movement for change. Love this. Just a little reminder from a well-respected McKinsey & Company consulting, global consulting firm, when they were doing work in revitalizing rural Australia. If they had a choice between $50 million to rejuvenate a region and $2 million and 20 committed volunteers, in their experience, the 2 million and 20 committed volunteers, they will get more done every single time because they have passion, they care. They have an investment and a stake in the community. So not to engage resident leaders, probably the single most untapped resource your community has. And recognizing that when you bring community resident leaders together with organizational leaders, they speak two different languages. So every person from an organization comes with their strat plan, their 5-year, strategy, their mission, their vision, their values. Community members as individuals are tokenized when we just pick me up and say, okay, Sylvia, as the poor person in our community, we want you on this task force. I can't speak for all poor people in this community. How, what an awful position to put me in. And yet all you well-meaning service providers are listening to me so intently, I feel really uncomfortable now because I don't want you designing your whole entire poverty reduction strategy based on my experience, right? I would be a fraud and I'd be misleading everyone. And so it's important that we invest time to bring folks with lived and living experience together into the same room. They will all share their own unique story. But our challenge then is to say, okay, we've all heard our individual stories. What are the common patterns and themes that transcend all our stories, right? And are common across all our stories. That's what the system can hear. That's what the system can respond to, not the individual story. And so we've got to be intentional about working differently to bring these diverse partners together. All right, so lastly, I'm a little over time, but I wanted to remind you that collective impact is a way of working together. And it's also about focusing in on the plan and the what, right? And it's hard to find that right balance between process and strategy, but you need both. It's critical people signing in know that this ain't going to be a quick fix. It didn't take us 5 years to get to this issue. It's not going to take 3 years to fix it, right? It's going to take time. And I love this notion of thinking about our effort as a co-created innovation space where we get to experiment with new approaches to complement what our individual organizations are doing and strengthen the community's response to the issue overall. So Kanya and Kramer, beautiful job giving us this great framework, makes it clean, makes it simple, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be messy. When you take this issue and you apply it, this framework, and you apply it to a particular issue in your community, it's still going to be messy. And you got to be comfortable with that mess. And you got to be comfortable trying things out, even when, like, not staying in theory forever and looking for the perfect plan. You want it to be roughly right. You want to try something, and then you want to learn. All right. So that is collective impact, kind of in a nutshell. Tell me, I probably have time for a couple of comments or questions if there are. before I'm going to put you into an exercise to help you kind of figure out what this means to you in the context of your community. And I don't know why this is jumping all over the place, but there you go. Anybody? Thoughts, comments, ideas, questions can be in the chat. How does this, those of you who have experience, how does this resonate with what you've learned about this work and working in this way?
Sylvia, I had a question about one of your slides.
Sure.
Yeah, the one that had the 4 quadrants, and there was the complicated, the complex, the common practice, and then there was one that was novel. I think novel.
Yeah, chaotic.
It listed chaotic. Yeah, what was that one?
So really what that's saying is when everything is really in flux and disruption, like during an emergent, like a state of emergency or whatever, it really is in that moment, like an emergency room, like people have to take charge, get us through the immediate crisis, right? And then once we begin to stabilize, then learn from that and say, okay, so what worked well? What of our current practices that are standard are simple or complicated that we just need to, rejuvenate and get going? And where have we learned that there's a real need and space for focused innovation?
Thank you.
Because there's a vulnerability. I know after COVID, one of the best quotes I ever heard was saying, one of the things is it revealed some long-standing structural flaws in our social infrastructure and our social safety net. And so there are things that were in place that are still valid. And then there are some structural flaws that we have kind of avoided dealing with because they're tricky and they're tough. And now we're seeing we got to deal. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for this presentation, and because it's just reinforcing some things that I've learned from decades of working in the community, and that is that if you do not involve I think you referred to them as the recipients, and just try to superimpose what you've learned and think that they need, then it's not going to be successful. So it's always imperative that you have to involve the community and the residents. And if you just involve organizations who know everything, I'm sorry, you're not going to be successful.
Dana, I have to say dead on. I will never forget going into a strategic planning exercise with an organization I volunteered for folks with developmental disabilities. And one of our board members asked the most important question I think ever. Who do we think our clients are? Are they the people that are fortunate enough to be enrolled in our current programs and services? Or do we see our responsibility to every person in our community with a developmental disability, whether they're in service or not? Because if it's the other, we're going to see that there's chunks of this population in our community we're not serving at all, right? So that caution, we don't know everything.
Right. You have to eliminate that narrow focus to be successful.
Absolutely. And it can be uncomfortable, right? That's the other part.
Yes.
All right.
Ladies, I love that point. Is there a suggestion? I mean, Diana or Sylvia, is there a way to, because you're right, you don't want people that are, and how do you go out and ask somebody like, hey, we're trying to work with literacy and I see you're illiterate. I mean, I don't know how do you do that and not offend people? How do you find the people
maybe
that
it's
should
not
be
literacy.
at the table?
Right? Maybe
Well,
it's not literacy, right?
Okay.
We have to be open. We think it's literacy and we can have some focused conversations about it, but they may say, yeah, literacy is important, but not before I can eat something, right? Or not before my kid can get to school, right? So I think what we have to do is notice where these people already are. Where are they already meeting up for coffee? Where are the organizations or the church networks that they are already feeling comfortable in? Who are their trusted messengers? And we go to those trusted messengers and we say, how do we better understand what the priorities and the needs are for this community? And you won't know that's, I think, the other shift for us organizational leaders. We're used to having the strategy and plan, and then we go out and we get feedback on is, how do we shift this approach so that it fits your need? But I think what's counterintuitive and really tough for us, because I remember this in my gut, going out to the community and people expecting I was going to give them an answer, and all I could give them were questions. And honestly, people said this to me and I didn't believe it. After you've been to about 4 or 5 of these conversations, you're going to start hearing the same things come up over and over and over again. Maybe in slightly different words, but it's the same thing. And that's your gut check, that's something that really matters, right, to the community. And there may be 4 or 5 of them. And in our community, there were 6 things that kept coming up when we said, look, this is our vision for the future as a community. What are the 4 or 5 things that if we got them done would give you confidence we were moving in the right direction? And over time, the same things came up. They were almost always things that different organizations had some stake in, but no one organization had as the anchor for their mission. So no one was picking it up or championing it. And the other thing is we unapologetically then went back to the community and said, here are the 6 key ideas that people keep bringing forward. And we have the bandwidth as a collective impact initiative to take on 1, maybe 2 to start. So you tell us which of these 6 do you want us to work on first? And you know what was interesting? Would have been the last one I would have picked, and actually ended up being the most powerful, because out of the woodwork, all these unusual people who I never would have guessed said, hey, if it's that, I'm in. Hey, if it's that, I've got these resources to put towards it. And that was the second way we affirmed this is a great place to start. Does that help, Julie? It's kind of flipping it upside down.
Well, I think we've already found, and I think you were part of that, finding that the reading level, that 3rd grade reading level is a huge issue. I'm just asking, I guess, how we find, and going back to Diana's question, how do we find people that need to be at the table that we already know that is an issue? I understand what you're saying, that there's probably other things as well.
Yeah.
I'm just, how do you find those people with a lived experience to be at the table? I guess that's
so I would say you go to the places where you already have relationship, where there is someone in that community or who is trusted by that community, and you ask them that question, or you ask them if you can be on an agenda at one of their future meetings, and bring as many questions as you can answers. Say, this is what we've done. This is what we understand. Do we have it right? What have we missed? And really defer, because their expertise is going to be essential.
Miss Sylvia.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a thought.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Miss Ashley. I saw you raising your hand. I was just thinking that a barbecue is a good approach. Going into the community and also having people available at the barbecue, taking part with it, because it gives an opportunity for food, conversation, interaction with multiple people, and just, surrounding ourselves in different environments where there are challenges.
I think that's brilliant. One of the best community organizers I've ever worked with says, why would you host a meeting when you could throw a party? And in a way, like I hear you kind of going at something exactly that. What's going to attract people, right? What's going to make people happy in a relaxed environment where they can chit chat and hear from each other? Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. If there are meetings already happening, how do you leverage that instead of feeling like you have to create your own meeting?
That's true what Regina said, but in those situations, you still have to be careful that you don't have people get into their little circles, and that
very good.
That you get into these familiar circles, and you don't launch out and get into the unfamiliar, so that you actually are able to garner information.
And some people are more courageous about that and more ready, right? And so that's why I think it's always wonderful if it's just a neighborhood, right? If it's just a neighborhood barbecue and there are local hosts, then those local hosts can say, we will be the spokesperson, right? We will be the group who will bring forward those messages from that community, right? And we will then be the spokesperson maybe to a broader dialogue, because that's what we're ready for.
Yeah. I was going to say something to what Julie had said about meeting. I was just going to say, like, meet the individual where because she was talking about literacy and, you know, things of that nature, but meet the individual where they're at. Like, I heard what Sylvia was saying, like meeting the those are on the next level, but so much as to what you said, the recipient. So I would say meet the recipient, like go directly to the source, like of where the problem is, and speak to those people, because that's where the problem lies. So we need to know what's going to impact them directly.
And you know what's interesting? Level. Absolutely, Ashley. And I would say the other piece is that in one neighborhood, that the primary issue related to literacy might be one thing, but in a different component, like a different area of the community, it may be something different.
Right.
And it's okay if you're using the same multi-sector approach, your process is consistent, but what the issue or area that you're championing as it relates to that issue could vary neighborhood to neighborhood, if that's what that community wants. So I'm aware of time, and I was going to break you out into small groups to have a dialogue. But here's what I'm proposing that we do instead. If I can invite you all, take a couple of minutes thinking about an issue that you care deeply about in the community, that you think the community should be working on together, and think about what are some of the top challenges that you would see in using a collective impact approach to address them. And what might be some of the opportunities that get created by embracing this kind of an approach. So how about I give you 2-3 minutes to just jot down your own thoughts, and then I'll invite whoever wants to share with whatever those insights are.
Sylvia.
Yes, Jeffrey.
Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna have to scoot. Okay. But I think this has been informative, and I wanted to add my 2 cents.
Absolutely, take it away.
I think that for me, being born and raised here in Rockford and West Side, who lives on the West Side, I think it's just taking a proactive approach as a citizen. I get a lot of flack because I work for the chamber and on economic issues as it relates to minority businesses. But because I'm in the community, I can deal with that. You know, I'm listening and I'm bringing back ideas to the chamber in discussion. But also importantly, I'm making connections. I'm engaged in my community because I care. And I think that's what we have to really think about as individuals, is that how engaged am I going to be?
I think that's dead on, Jeffrey. And I would say the other piece, because you're kind of got a foot in 2 very different camps that wouldn't necessarily always come together easily. One of the strengths that you embody is bringing unusual partners together. And that is part of where the magic happens, I think, because those unusual partners don't show up at the conversation with the same assumptions. Right. Exactly. And that's where all the opportunity starts to flourish. So glad you could be here.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're losing you. Okay.
All right. Talk to you.
Another minute. Then I'm curious to see what all comes up for y'all. This is fabulous, folks. Okay. Who has a couple of challenges or a challenge? Diana, do you have your hand up there? Am I seeing properly? Because you're muted. I can't hear you.
Yes, I did have my hand up. And one of the things that I've been trying to work on is equity. And people always think you have to, I found out that if you're going to achieve equity, whether it's a nonprofit or in a municipal organization, you're going to have to address the systematic barriers within that, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to be inclusive, we're going to change words, we're going to do this. But unless you change the mindset that's within that systematic barrier, then you're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I really want to work on. I say equity. If we focus on equity, just think about how comprehensive that can be in all the
Beneficial
areas.
to so many, right?
Yes, yes.
You might want to take a look at, and I think it's linked in the slides, that new definition of collective impact that's rooted in equity. That paper comes along with 5 specific strategies for tangibly what to do to advance equity. Because I think, like many of these issues that kind of everybody says but may not mean the same things about, it's one thing to say, yes, I support equity, but tangibly, practically, what are we going to do in Rockford to make that happen? That's the conversation we need to be kind of teasing out and figuring out together. So yes, and let's be really concrete and real about what that could look like in digestible bites, as we're not letting go of the North Star, but in ways that are practical and real.
Yes. Thank you. I'll look at that.
Anybody else? Opportunities for this?
One thing that's like near and dear to my heart that I've been like kind of focusing on for the past few months, and is like mental health in the African American community, and the domestic violence in the community as well. I think, and if we tackle those issues, like if we build self-confidence in women and in the homeless community and stuff like that, that'll help eliminate some of the issues we have going on. Because I work downtown, so I see a lot of the homeless people and a lot of the mental health issues and stuff in the community. So yeah, that's one thing I've been kind of geared towards.
Thank you for that, Ashley, because I do think, we see areas that affect so many people, and putting focused attention on some of these might actually create lots of positive ripples across so many of the other issues. Trisha, what did you see or hear, or what's coming up for you as an opportunity?
So none of these problems are anything but complex, right? And one thing that I see as a challenge or a struggle is services that are underutilized already. I think about like going into a group and doing all of the right approaches and getting all the right stakeholders, and some of the solutions might involve services that are happening now, but you go and look at those services and how they're being implemented, and they're great, but they're underutilized. So I almost feel like if you ask what's the problem, I feel like some really complicated, deep research would be needed to really get the answer to that, because the first thing out of, off of the mind might be representing a service that's already available, but it just needs, more publicity or more encouragement to get people involved, or, that kind of thing. Like, that's not probably the issue. So I wonder how to avoid doing the goose chasing. Like, let's put all our resources into this one thing when we think it's the solution, when actually it's quite a bit more complex than that.
Wow, I think that's hugely insightful, and that's a place of real leverage. Because if you can show that the service is there, it's underutilized, and it lines up, so say Ashley said mental health is a huge issue, right? And we've got all these mental health support services, then you're zeroing in exactly on maybe where the leverage is. What do we need to learn? What do we need to understand about why people aren't making it to the service? And it may not have anything to do with the service at all, right? We were working with a group in northern Saskatchewan that had a whole nest of young people that were at risk of not graduating from high school. And then when they went in to explore innovative solutions, one of the things they discovered was, well, guess what? Many of these kids live remotely and there's no car at home. So you miss the school bus, you're out for the day, right? Or, you know, many of them weren't going to graduate because they didn't have their mandatory phys ed credit. Why didn't they get a phys ed credit? Jeepers, you know, how hard is it to do phys ed? Well, it was because they didn't have money at home to buy the tracks, shoes, and the whatever, and they were going to be humiliated, and they'd rather fail high school than admit that they were that vulnerable. So the teachers set up with a local business owner who opened the store after hours, and they got in to go in and shop and help themselves to anything that he was going to sort of put on sale anyway, right? But they came with brand new stuff that was, you know, got tags, and suddenly they're going to gym. So I think your point is dead on. There's lots of times where the barrier isn't what we think it is. And that's why you have to build the trust and have those conversations, because it could be a relatively easy tweak, or nobody's thought about how do you do the transportation bit, right? And what we need is this kind of a solution. So I think you're right. Sometimes it isn't as tough as we would think. And so some of them are quick fixes and some of them are longer term. But there you go. I could stay having this conversation with you all for all afternoon, but I know our time is wrapping up. So I thank you for the opportunity to chat with you all. And I love the energy you bring to your community. And over to you, Pam, to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. We so value the relationship we have with you, and in our commitment really to build our community's capacity to do this work well, to work in true collaboration with one another to address our most significant social issues. So thank you so much for continuing to walk with Rockford through this process.
Pleasure.
So much. And I just wanted to take a second, if we could, to introduce Sonia. Sonia is the new, I believe, ED president of the Tamarack Institute. So we are so fortunate to have you with us today. So thank you for being here. And
Thank you. I'm actually the consulting director of community innovation at Tamarack. Yes.
all right, I gave you a new title. So sorry if
I know. Thanks.
Can I say we are utterly thrilled to have her? So really excited, because I know you folks are going to be doing some work around what does it mean to be community innovators.
Right, and Sonia's offered to work with us, so we have a great opportunity to work with some of the best in around the globe. But also thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your interest in collective impact. Thank you all for your desire to make our community a better place, and by working together to do that. So thanks again for being here. Look forward to working with you all again in the future and on our continued endeavors. But have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you all in person very soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.